This interview is brought to you by Netflix. I'm very happy to be joined by Michael Duplater. You're the director of design over Monolith, working on Shadow of Mordor.
Yes, indeed.
Lord of the Rings. Thank you for actually putting a game inside of Mordor. As a kid reading the books, there's always that sense of what is it? It's probably one of the most opaque aspects of Middle-earth lore, and you guys are actually starting to kind of visually articulate it. Was that daunting to go into such, I think, uncharted territories, or was it exciting?
Both daunting and exciting, definitely. So it's very iconic and very central, but as you say, also unknown. So it kind of gave us the best of both worlds to go somewhere really interesting, explore it, but also see it in a way that it hadn't been seen before, because this is just after Sauron's return, after millennia, so it hasn't transformed. Mount Doom's not, spewing lava. Barad-dûr has fallen into ruins. So it really was, as you say, both exciting and daunting as a location.
Now, the game takes place in the interim between The Hobbit and the beginning of The Lord of the Rings, but you play a human of Gondor who's somehow in Mordor, which almost sounds like an impossibility. So to the extent you're willing to, if you could explain sort of the story and the circumstances that set up the game.
Yeah, I mean, Boromir was obviously very clear about that. One does not simply walk into Mordor. But again, so, Sauron was defeated at the end of the Second Age, which is what we see at the start of Fellowship of the Ring. He's been banished for millennia. Gondor's been guarding the gates of Mordor and the Black Gates, so there's a garrison of rangers there, but after a couple of thousand years of not much happening, it's really fallen into a skeleton crew on the frontiers of Gondor's empire. And that's where we meet Talion, is stationed on the Black Gates. And these guys are completely unprepared for Sauron's return when he does come back, and it's devastating. This garrison's destroyed. And really what Talion expects will have happened at that point is he's been slaughtered, he's died, but something happened, something, transformative. There's a wraith, and he doesn't find peace in death, but he's brought back for some purpose, which then, becomes the mystery for him to unravel. But it's very, very closely connected with these obviously very monumental events taking place in Mordor, with Sauron's return, and with some other forces that have sort of been reawakened by that.
So the core of this game, because he's one human among just sort of countless orcs and other types of nasties out there, it's this nemesis system where you really are kind of giving a personality and a procedural story almost for the player to experience as he encounters various orcs throughout all of Mordor.
Yeah, it's really, we wanted to make an open world game, a game where you can explore, and a third person action game, and where we really wanted to push things was on the enemies. Was you having your own unique, personal stories and relationships that build up over time. And that sort of was very inspired by the lore as well. When we looked at, one of the main things we looked at when we looked at Mordor is that fortress, that tower of Cirith Ungol, and where those two orcs are fighting over Frodo's shirt after he loses it, and then Sam exploits that. And it just erupts into this massive violence of them slaughtering each other. So how can one man take down armies, by turning them against each other, by exploiting this sort of weakness, I guess, of evil to turn on itself, and wanting to sort of blow that up onto an epic scale.
I mean, it's a hard concept to get your head wrapped around, because it is something actually quite new. If you wouldn't if you could describe what's actually happening with these various orcs. You encounter them, you can make them do your bidding, or you can not defeat them in battle and kind of have them bear a grudge against you, and they level up. I mean, is that happening? Is that really just happening in the world, or is it just something happening in the code off in the background until you run into them?
No, it's truly happening in the world. We truly are, simulating the living world, where they have their own personalities, they have their own goals, they're going on their own missions, they have their own power structure and their own hierarchy. I mean, without referring too much to other games, I think almost the closest analogy is a sports game. It's like a season mode. You have your players, they have their names, they have their stats, they have their histories, they have injuries. Over the course of a season, they build up stories, they build rivalries, they meet each other, they remember. So, a very, very procedural, dynamic system like that, but applied to an action game. And what that really means, not only does it make a lot of variety to the gameplay, because you've got to adapt your tactics and adapt your style to exploit their strengths and weaknesses, but it makes the world, very much more alive. Like, no two playthroughs are the same. And the fact that these guys remember you and you're building your legend among their society makes you're making your own very personal, memorable enemies. Ultimately, the reason it's called the Nemesis system is, you're going to have these individual guys that maybe you've met 7, 8, 9 times. Maybe they ran away from you the first time. Maybe they got lucky and shot you the second time. Maybe they got stabbed in the back by one of their own guys the third time. Then maybe they got promoted and, grew in power. So there's these very, very unique stories.
I like the sports analogy. I hadn't thought of it that way. Now, of course, I think it also helps exemplify what seems to be so ambitious about this game. It's one thing to have that sense of rivalry on a 100-yard field. You're doing this in a very large open-world game, as you said, with the narrative put on top.
Yep.
In the course of working on this game, was it always kind of clear to you that you could do that? It just seems like such an amazing goal.
I think it's, fairly insanely ambitious. But, there's two things about games now, especially as we go into next gen, that require you to be insanely ambitious. One is it's only, the best games that really break through or can get anyone's attention, and especially if you're trying to do something new and something original, you need to bring something new and innovative and genuinely next gen in order to have a shot at doing that. So playing it safe and not being insanely ambitious is incredibly dangerous.
Now, the one thing I noticed very strongly at the beginning of the game was that there were some visual similarities to Assassin's Creed. The traversals up the side of a building and the sort of the rope connections between buildings to sort of, daintily walk across, in addition to what looked like some towers that you would, go to try to open up sections of the map. Is that strong a similarity something that is giving you any concern? Because after more of the demo played out, it's like, okay, this game definitely has its own character, but it does have this sort of immediate visual impact that's very reminiscent of the Assassin's Creed franchise.
Yeah, we're definitely like a third-person open world action adventure that supports, the sort of movement and stealth and combat. But in playtest, or exactly what you said, the more people get in and play the game, we really are our own thing, I think.
And of course, it's its own story. This is not something that's been pulled out of, sort of pre-existing fiction in the Tolkien universe. How much liberties are you sort of allowed to take, and how much are you are you researching, and you're really trying to make sure that it works within kind of the well-understood mythology that Tolkien set up, that, there's a lot of diehard fans of?
Yeah, well, and a lot of diehard fans, including us, obviously. Yeah. Like, you don't move to Seattle and live there.
Very bad idea to work on this game if you don't like Tolkien.
Exactly, move countries to work on it. But so I think the thing is, we're like enormously respectful of both the books and the movies, but there just are these fantastic spaces that Tolkien deliberately left in there where there are so many potential stories to tell. And in particular, the fact that there is this, decades-long block in between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, where a lot of, phenomenal stuff happens, like the growth of Sauron's forces, obviously the search for the One Ring, very, very world-changing event. It's almost like the space in between World War I and World War II. It's this valley of darkness where the whole world's undergoing
it's the Weimar Republic of Lord of the Rings.
So, there were a lot of possibilities there. I think Peter Jackson in particular was so supportive of us not doing a movie game, so even his films, and he sort of said this in interviews, they're not just straight clones of the books, they're amazing movies in their own right. And of course, another big reference for us, Arkham isn't just the movie game of Christopher Nolan's Batman, it's an amazing game in its own right. So both of those two things were very inspirational to us, and he was directly supportive of that, like make the best game that you can as a game. Don't try and clone the films. Games are their own media, and you should take advantage of that.
Well, you definitely have me intrigued. I'm looking forward to seeing more. Obviously, Shadow Mordor is coming out this year. What systems?
It's so Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and then PC, and also PS3 and Xbox 360.
You definitely have your work cut out for you, but I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
With that interview, let's thank our sponsor, Netflix. Netflix is the best way to get movies and TV shows straight into your home, saving you time, money, and hassle. The second season of House of Cards begins in just a few short weeks, so there's no better time to catch up on the fantastic first season. Titles are subject to availability, but you can get a free trial membership and support Red 3 Games by signing up at netflix.com/Red3Games.